Age doesn't dim desire, it deepens understanding. And when a man crosses 60, he steps into a phase where physical pleasure becomes more than a flash of instinct. It becomes a quiet conversation with the body, a reflection of what he has lived, learned, and survived, and this awareness transforms intimacy into something slower, richer, wiser than firework-like youth. Because now pleasure is not chased with urgency, but welcomed like sunrise, steady, inevitable, warm, and part of a lifelong rhythm that only experience can teach. And this truth alone is powerful because it means the flame inside him is not weaker. It is more controlled, more meaningful, more intentional. And when he embraces this shift instead of fearing it, he discovers the beauty of maturity, the dignity of inner balance, and the strength that comes not from being fast, but from being fully present in his own skin. He begins to realize that aging is not a thief, but a sculptor, removing the unnecessary rush, carving patience into muscle memory, teaching him that pleasure is not a race, but a journey. And in this stage of life, the body responds differently, slower but deeper, softer but wiser, like a seasoned river that still flows but no longer needs to roar to prove itself. And this becomes a lesson in power, the power of choosing pace instead of being driven by it. The power of savoring instead of consuming, the power of listening to one's own body without shame or comparison. And in doing so, he steps into a chapter of self-awareness that youth cannot replicate because maturity is not the absence of desire. It is desire refined. He learns that connection with himself is not a selfish act, but a form of emotional clarity. Because when a man knows how to be gentle with himself, he also learns how to be gentle with life. And such wisdom is earned through years of trial, triumph, and understanding that pleasure and confidence are not opposites. They are partners, shaping each other, supporting each other, breathing through the highs and lows of age. And with every year that passes, he gains not less potential, but more depth, more sensitivity, more control. And this gives him a kind of power younger men rarely hold. A power built on patience, on self-awareness, on the courage to acknowledge that the body is not a machine, but a companion, deserving of respect, gratitude, and mindful attention. He feels in his bones that intimacy is no longer about proving strength, but about experiencing it from within. He stands at a point in life where every sensation becomes more meaningful because he has lived enough to know that pleasure is fleeting only when it is rushed and lasting when it is embraced slowly. And this shift from urgency to awareness is not a decline, but a transformation, turning physical experience into emotional resonance, turning touch into memory and rhythm into meditation. And the moment he understands this, he stops comparing himself to who he once was because he realizes he is not meant to be the same. He is meant to be more, not more energetic or more youthful, but more attuned, more present, more aware of every breath, every heartbeat, every moment of connection within his own body. And this awareness is not weakness. It is evolution. In this maturity, he discovers that desire is not measured by speed or intensity, but by presence. And presence is the gift of age because a young man chases sensation while an older man listens to it, feels it, respects it, and through this listening, he recognizes that nothing about him is fading. It is ripening, like fruit that has taken years of sunlight and seasons to grow sweet. And this sweetness cannot be rushed or replicated by youth. It belongs only to time, to experience, to the deep knowing that pleasure does not come from force, but from patience, not from urgency, but from harmony. And when he allows himself to breathe, to slow down, to connect, he discovers that his body still responds, not like a spark, but like a steady flame. He understands that the dignity of aging is not found in holding on to youth, but in embracing the wisdom that youth could never see. And this wisdom makes pleasure a path, not a peak, a rhythm, not a reaction. And through this rhythm, he rediscovers confidence, not the loud confidence of proving something to the world, but the calm confidence of knowing oneself deeply, fully, quietly, and undeniably. And this is the deeper truth. Age does not take desire away. It reveals its real meaning. A healthy, mindful rhythm becomes a reflection of a man's inner balance, showing how calmly he breathes, how smoothly blood flows, how clearly his mind settles into presence. And this rhythm, steady rather than rushed, tells the story of how well he listens to his body instead of fighting it. Because the body speaks through pace and sensation the way a heart speaks through pulse, gentle, persistent, alive, and as men age, rhythm becomes more than movement. It becomes feedback, a real-time measurement of circulation, mood, stress levels, confidence, and vitality. And when one moves with patience rather than urgency, the nervous system relaxes, the muscles soften, and the experience becomes less of a chase and more of an alignment with self, like meditation through motion, where pleasure meets health and awareness becomes strength. This rhythm acts like a mirror. Too fast and the body feels strained, too tense and the breath becomes shallow, too distracted and connection dissolves. But when pace becomes controlled, breathing deepens, heart rate steadies, and the body responds in harmony rather than resistance. And this harmony is not only physical but emotional, a sign that he is present rather than pressured, guided rather than driven, attuned rather than rushed. And when he embraces this connection, he learns that pleasure can be gentle, measured, soothed rather than forced. And this understanding doesn't weaken desire, it strengthens it, because anything nurtured grows and anything rushed breaks. A balanced rhythm also supports longevity, stamina, and hormonal stability, creating a kind of cycle where calmness builds endurance, focus builds enjoyment, and steady movement builds confidence in the body's ability to sustain itself without urgency or struggle. Because a man who learns to slow down strengthens himself rather than drains himself. And this is how rhythm becomes health. Not by speed, but by consistency. Not by intensity, but by awareness. Like a heartbeat that keeps life going, not by beating loud, but by beating steady. And when rhythm is respected, the body rewards with comfort, stability, warmth, and responsiveness, showing that vitality is not lost with age, but transformed into something deeper and more sustainable than youthful impulse. He begins to recognize that every breath he takes during moments of intimacy is as important as the movement itself, because breathing drives circulation, circulation drives sensitivity, and sensitivity drives pleasure and relaxation. And when breath and rhythm are aligned, the experience becomes smoother, less tense, more natural. And instead of rushing toward a finish, he enjoys the journey, like a slow walk under evening sky rather than a sprint toward a destination. And this enjoyment is medicine, lowering stress hormones, reducing anxiety, easing tension throughout the body, and creating a sense of emotional calm that lingers long after the moment ends. This awareness teaches that something as simple as pacing can affect mental health, sleep quality, cardiovascular function, and overall emotional state, because when a man lives rushed, he burns out. But when he lives rhythmically, he restores himself, and maturity offers him the chance to choose restoration over exhaustion, connection over urgency, sensation over speed, and this choice becomes a form of self-respect, a declaration that his well-being matters, that his body is not something to race through, but something to inhabit fully. He discovers that rhythm is not only about movement, but about attention, where the mind is during those personal moments, whether it is scattered or centered, chaotic or calm, because when the mind rushes, the body follows, but when the mind settles, the body responds with ease, and this alignment becomes a sign of wellness, a signal that he has learned to guide his experience instead of letting it control him, and this guidance grants him both power and peace. Over time, he realizes that rhythm isn't just a reflection of physical health, it's also a reflection of emotional maturity, because patience is strength, presence is discipline, and awareness is confidence. And these qualities grow sharper, not duller, with age, giving him the opportunity to experience pleasure with more clarity than he ever did in youth, not because he moves faster, but because he moves smarter, listening, breathing, adjusting, responding like a conductor guiding a symphony rather than a drum pounding out of control. He begins to feel not only pleasure, but pride. Pride in understanding his own tempo, pride in choosing comfort over haste, pride in knowing that his body can still respond beautifully when treated with care instead of force. And this pride restores something many men fear losing with age, the sense of inner strength, of vitality that comes not from speed, but from control, not from urgency, but from rhythm. And this restoration builds not just confidence in the moment, but confidence in life. Through rhythm, the body teaches him balance, reminding him that health is not simply physical. It is mental, it is emotional, it is energetic, and all these layers respond to how gently or forcefully he treats himself. The slower he moves, the more he feels, the more he feels, the more connected he becomes, the more connected he becomes, the deeper his experience grows, and such depth is only possible when rhythm is respected rather than rushed, because rushing burns sensation while steadiness expands it, turning a moment into minutes and minutes into memory, something richer than quick satisfaction, something meaningful, grounding, alive. This transformation becomes a testament to the fact that pleasure and well-being are linked, that wisdom and intimacy support each other, that age does not take away vitality but requires a new way of honoring it, and that honoring begins with rhythm, a rhythm that speaks through pulse, breath, relaxation, awareness, and the silent understanding that health and pleasure are not separate. They are parts of the same living body. Self-care becomes a declaration of dignity for a man in his 60s, a reminder that his body is not something to hide from, but something to honor, because a lifetime of silence, shame, or hush-hush conversations may have taught him to keep his needs in the dark, yet wisdom invites him now to step into light and recognize that caring for himself is not indulgence, but responsibility, a gift he gives to his mind, his hormones, his heart, and his emotional balance. And when he touches life with gentleness toward himself, he discovers a confidence that is calm, grounded, and unshakable, the kind that doesn't demand approval because it rises from within. He learns that self-care is not an act of weakness, but an act of courage, refusing to accept the outdated belief that a man should endure stress, fatigue, or dissatisfaction in silence. And with each moment he spends listening to his body, he breaks generational chains of discomfort and secrecy, reclaiming sensitivity, reclaiming breath, reclaiming inner safety. And this reclamation is strength because it takes bravery to unlearn shame, to rewrite what society once whispered into him, and to choose nourishment over denial. When he gives himself permission to enjoy stillness, he begins healing parts of himself that tension once protected, because self-care is more than physical comfort. It is emotional release. It is the body saying thank you after decades of being pushed, ignored, hurried, and managed like a machine instead of a living companion. And when he rests into awareness, he feels stress melt like ice under warm hands. He feels muscles loosen, breath deepen, mind soften, and he realizes that caring for his own pleasure, comfort, and wellness is not selfish, but deeply human, a natural response to existence. Self-care teaches him to be present instead of numb, gentle instead of rigid, attuned instead of detached, and this presence enriches his relationship with himself and with others. Because a man who honors his body is better equipped to show empathy, patience, warmth, and emotional intelligence in every corner of his life. And there is power in that kindness, power in knowing that he is worthy of attention, peace, and personal well-being no matter his age. He looks back at the years he spent proving masculinity by holding pain inside, hiding vulnerability, and rushing through moments meant to be felt. And he understands now that true strength is not suppression. It is awareness, because awareness allows him to meet his needs instead of running from them. And with this awareness, he experiences self-care without guilt, without tension, without feeling like he must justify taking care of himself. He sees clearly that the more gently he treats his body, the more life responds with energy and emotional clarity. And this clarity becomes motivation, a quiet engine inside him pushing him toward healthier choices, better sleep, deeper breathing, calmer mornings, and more compassionate evenings with himself and with those he loves. Because self-care radiates outward like warmth from a flame. The older he becomes, the more valuable self-care feels, not as luxury, but as nourishment, as maintenance of his emotional and physical foundation, because caring for himself strengthens circulation, lowers stress, smooths mood, and supports hormone balance, not through force, but through respect. Through listening, through letting the body exhale years of silent tension. He realizes that the shame he once felt was never his to carry. It was taught, inherited, absorbed from a world that feared softness, yet softness becomes power in his maturity because softness allows him to understand his heart instead of hardening against it. And this understanding leads to resilience, not fragility, an inner steadiness that grows each time he chooses self-care over self-neglect. He finds that self-care improves emotional connection not only with himself, but with the world around him. Because when a man feels safe within himself, he no longer views vulnerability as threat, intimacy as weakness, or pleasure as something to rush and finish. He sees it instead as nourishment, as human right, as experience to savor rather than hide from. He begins approaching his needs with curiosity rather than embarrassment, asking what his body is trying to say instead of silencing it. And this communication builds trust between mind and body, restoring harmony where years of tension once lived. Because when he listens, the body responds, opening, relaxing, breathing, and delivering sensations with more depth and ease than force ever could. Years of wisdom tell him that caring for himself doesn't reduce masculinity. It amplifies it because strength is not loud, it is steady, not rigid, it is balanced, not untouched, it is self-aware, and each act of self-care teaches him that pleasure and well-being grow from the same root, respect for the self. He carries this truth quietly inside him like a flame that does not need to prove its fire, and with it he moves through life with softness that coexists with power, feeling more alive not because he hides, but because he honors his human nature without apology, without shame, without fear of judgment. And this quiet liberation becomes the language through which he experiences his later years, present, confident, intentional, and whole. Control becomes a form of inner power when a man discovers that his body listens more closely to patience than to urgency, because presence is what guides sensation, breath is what carries it, and awareness is what deepens it, transforming physical experience from something rushed into something felt, understood, and lived within. And when rhythm slows, the nervous system eases, muscles relax, heart rate steadies, and sensitivity sharpens instead of dulling under pressure, turning what was once fast into something fuller, deeper, and more connected to the moment. He learns that pacing is not restriction but freedom, a way of taking ownership of his own experience instead of being carried by habit or impulse. And this ownership is power, quiet but undeniable, because choosing pace means choosing clarity over chaos, sensation over speed, and satisfaction over strain. And the body rewards this choice with endurance, with calm, with a sense that time expands when rhythm is respected and breath leads the way, instead of rushing him toward an end he never needed to chase. The rhythm of awareness becomes a guide into his own strength, teaching him that pleasure is richest when the mind and body are aligned, when movement follows breath rather than ego, when stillness and motion coexist like waves on a calm ocean. Steady, repeating, intentional, alive in this controlled rhythm, he finds not limitation but space for sensation to unfold naturally, for confidence to rise from presence, for energy to move freely without being burned out in a hurry. Because the slower the rhythm, the more the nervous system feels safe. And safety opens the body like dawn opens sky, gently, gradually, with color instead of force. He understands then that control is not about restraint, but about guiding sensation instead of fighting it, holding attention instead of scattering it, letting pleasure build like a story rather than collapse like a sprint. Control teaches him to breathe deeply, to feel the pulse of his own heart as part of the rhythm rather than something separate from it, to stay with sensation rather than abandon it at the first rise of tension or excitement. And when he breathes through the moment expands, turning seconds into minutes and minutes into something timeless, something memorable, something nourishing. He recognizes that endurance is not built by force but by patience, by listening to where the body wants to go instead of dragging it forward. And this listening becomes communication, a dialogue between sensation and awareness, each informing the other, each responding with more depth, like music played slowly enough for every note to be heard in full. The body, once hurried, now becomes a landscape to explore rather than a task to complete, and this exploration reveals stamina that urgency always stole away. Power comes when he realizes he no longer needs to rush toward climax like a finish line, because the value lies not in reaching the end, but in feeling the journey fully, understanding every pulse, every breath, every warm wave of sensation that rises without being forced to peak too soon. He begins to trust the process, to trust his own body, to trust that slowing down does not diminish masculinity but fortifies it, giving him command over his experience instead of surrendering it to habit or instinct. And this trust becomes a foundation of calm strength that stays with him outside the moment as well. He carries this steadiness into his day, walking slower, thinking clearer, responding instead of reacting, because rhythm practiced in private becomes rhythm lived in life, shaping not only pleasure, but patience, self-regulation, mental balance, and emotional peace. Each time he chooses control over urgency, he reinforces his own authority over his body, proving to himself that discipline does not limit freedom. It creates it, like reins on a powerful horse, giving direction rather than restricting movement. He feels energy move through him without escaping too quickly, like water held by cupped hands rather than spilling through clenched fists. And this containment is not tension, but harmony, allowing him to enjoy more, feel more, stay longer with sensation instead of losing it to speed. He finds strength in slowing the moment, grounding it with breath, guiding it with awareness. And in doing so, he discovers a version of himself that is calm yet powerful, patient yet alive, gentle yet deeply capable of intensity when he chooses. Not because he must, but because he decides. Control then becomes presence. The ability to guide rhythm with intention, to breathe through waves of sensation instead of being swept away by them, to remain fully inside the experience rather than rushing toward its end. And this presence gives him mastery over his own physical being. He steps into an era of life where pleasure becomes not just an event, but a practice, not just release, but awareness, not just sensation, but connection with his inner world. And through rhythm, he learns the language of his own body. Slow, steady, kind, attuned to breath and pulse and subtle response. What once felt like instinct becomes art, shaped by intention rather than driven by urgency. And in this art, he feels a strength that does not fade with age, but grows. Quiet and confident, grounded in control, born from rhythm, sustained by awareness and breath.